A city can get used to many things. The noise of the market, the coming and going of motorcycles, the routine of those who work early to get ahead. But there are moments when something breaks that normalcy so brutally that it leaves everyone wondering how it could have happened. That was exactly what happened in a Bolivian town, when a shocking discovery began to reveal a story of violence that no one had imagined. As details began to come to light, it became clear that behind this crime was a story much closer, much more disturbing, and marked by a betrayal that no one saw coming. If you want to know all the details of this story, stay until the end of this video. The case of Virginia Cruz. Every day we live with evil. We witness the darkest part of human behavior. The suffering caused by one individual to others is something latent in our society. In Criminal Investigators, we will delve into that dark side of humanity. We will bring the most perverse crimes to the screen and try to enter the minds of those beings who commit the most terrible acts. I am Mario, and today I bring you another case. But before we begin, I want you to tell me where you are watching us from. We really like to know how far these stories reach. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share this video if you think someone else might be interested. And now, let's begin. The discovery occurred in an area of Catalabaja, on the outskirts of Sucre. En Tegnid. People passing through the area found suspicious abandoned bags, something that immediately caught their attention because of the way they were placed and the smell that was beginning to be felt in the air. When authorities arrived at the scene and checked the contents, they confirmed that there were human remains inside. The scene was quickly cordoned off, while forensics and police began the inspection work, and what they found indicated that this was no ordinary death. The body had been dismembered and distributed in different packages, suggesting that someone had tried to hide the crime by separating the parts to make identification difficult. As the hours passed, the news began to circulate in the city at the same time that investigators began the process of identifying the victim and reconstructing what had happened. What initially seemed like an isolated finding would soon become one of the most shocking cases to shake that city in recent years. Once the remains were transferred to the Institute of Forensic Investigations, specialists began the analysis work to determine exactly what had happened. The priority was to establish the identity of the victim and find out the cause of death, for which the doctors reviewed every recovered part of the body and precisely documented all injuries. The autopsy results were clear, and the cause of death was declared as asphyxiation. The woman had been strangled because someone had squeezed her neck with enough force to prevent her from breathing. The brain showed obvious signs of lack of oxygen, confirming that she had spent some time struggling to breathe before dying. The cuts on the body also caught the attention of the forensics. They were not messy or the product of an impulsive attack, given that they were precise, made with knowledge of how to cut certain parts of the body. For investigators, this suggested that whoever did it had some kind of knowledge of anatomy, or at least a clear idea of what they were doing. The crime did not seem to be the product of a moment of rage. On the contrary, everything indicated that it had been executed with time and a certain level of planning. But to understand how it got to that point, it is first necessary to know the young woman who had lost her life. Virginia Cruz Paniagua was born in 2007 in the city of Sucre, Bolivia. She was the youngest daughter of Gonzaga Paniagua Perez and Ademar Cruz Martinez, and grew up alongside her three sisters in a home where daily effort was part of everyday life. From a young age, she stood out for her responsible character and dedication to her studies. Likewise, those who knew her described her as a quiet, kind young woman, always willing to fulfill her obligations. She was a teenager who understood well the economic difficulties of her family, and instead of complaining about them, looked for ways to help. Despite her young age, Virginia had a clear idea of what she wanted for her future. Her teachers considered her an outstanding student and especially highlighted her ability in mathematics. That discipline and commitment had made her one of the most promising students of her class. But her story was not marked only by her academic achievements, as it had also been crossed by a family tragedy that would change the course of her life and force her to assume responsibilities much earlier than is appropriate for someone her age. When Virginia was just 14 years old, her family's stability suddenly changed. Her father, Adamar, worked as a bricklayer in the construction of a building, and that was the main economic support of the home. Each workday represented the effort to support his wife and daughters. One day, while doing his job on the 5th floor of the construction site, an accident occurred that would end in tragedy when Adamar fell from that height and during the fall, hit electrical cables. Death was immediate, and the family was devastated by the news, because there were no goodbyes or time to prepare for such a great loss. From that moment on, the economic responsibility fell completely on her mother, Gonzaga. With several daughters in her care, and without the income that previously supported the home, the situation became difficult, but far from giving up, she decided to look for a way to get ahead. To support her family, Gonzaga started a small business preparing masitas, traditional sweet pastries that are usually sold in markets and streets in Bolivia. Every day she prepared them at home, baked them, and then went out to sell them as a street vendor in different areas of Sucre. The work was hard and required long walks under the sun, offering the products to anyone willing to buy them. It was not a big business, nor did it generate large income, but it was enough for the family to support themselves. Virginia observed her mother's effort every day and decided that she should also help. So, despite continuing to study, she began selling masitas in the peasant market of Sucre. While working in the mornings, Virginia attended school in the afternoons, which made her routine very exhausting. But she never let fatigue affect her academic performance. She studied at night, did her homework, and the next day began the same cycle again. Her effort paid off because, since elementary school, she had been an outstanding student, and over the years, she remained among the best averages in her class. Her teachers especially recognized her talent for mathematics, an ability that even led her to help other students. At a certain point, the teachers proposed that she give math tutoring classes for some classmates. That not only represented a recognition of her academic ability, but also a small opportunity to obtain additional income. December 11, 2025, was one of the most important moments of her life. During the school graduation ceremony, Virginia was recognized as the best student of her class. That result gave her direct access to the university, without the need to take an entrance exam. She also received the government incentive destined for the best high school graduates in the country, an economic support that would help her family. Virginia had two possible paths in mind for her university future. She was thinking of studying medicine or systems engineering. She had not yet made a final decision, but she knew she was about to start a new stage full of opportunities. So we come to Thursday, December 18th, and everything started like any other day for Virginia. In the morning, she was at the peasant market of Sucre, at her usual masita stall, where several people saw her working as always, serving customers and talking with those passing by. Around 1 in the afternoon, some market vendors noticed that Virginia was talking to a young man who had arrived on a motorcycle. To those observing the scene from their nearby stalls, it was simply someone who knew her. Minutes later, Virginia left her stall and went with that young man. Some witnesses remembered seeing them leave the market together on the motorcycle. The hours kept passing and the market activity continued normally, but from that moment on, no one saw Virginia at her stall or returning to the area. As the afternoon went on, Virginia's absence began to worry her family. At home, they expected her to return as she usually did after finishing her day at the market. However, the hours began to pass and she did not appear. When night came and Virginia still had not returned, the uneasiness turned into real concern, and that was when her sister tried to contact her several times by phone, but the calls went unanswered. That was not normal. Virginia usually always answered, especially when it came to her family. Given the lack of answers, her sister decided to call Virginia's boyfriend to ask if he knew anything. He replied that he had not been with her that day, although he mentioned that Virginia had told him she had to meet someone after work to help them with something. Fear began to grow, and the family decided not to wait any longer and go out to look for her. They called friends, acquaintances, and began to go through different places in the city, asking if anyone had seen her. That night, they walked through streets, markets, and nearby areas, trying to find some clue. They also returned to the peasant market to ask the vendors who had seen her for the last time, and although the answers were confusing, they agreed on something, and that was that Virginia had left the place during the afternoon and had not returned. Seeing that they could not find her, the family went to the police station to report her disappearance. The official report was registered and the formal search began, that night being one of the longest the Cruz family had lived. Once the report was registered, the police began to reconstruct the girl's last hours. Investigators began interviews with people in her close circle with the aim of establishing who she had been with and what she had done on the day of her disappearance. They spoke with family members, schoolmates, and friends. They also interviewed school teachers, and no one mentioned enmities or problems that could explain what happened. Her friends commented that Virginia used to keep a fairly clear routine between the market and school, and that on that Thursday, she had told them she was going to work as usual. None of them had information about any different plan for that day. At the peasant market, they also began to gather testimonies. Some vendors remembered seeing her during the afternoon talking to a young man on a motorcycle, and that information caught the attention of investigators because it could be the last person who had been with her. As testimonies were gathered, some names began to appear that needed to be verified. Among them was Virginia's boyfriend, who had to explain where he had been that day. The name of a man also came up who, according to some comments, might have bothered her in the past. But a third name also appeared, that of the person Virginia was supposedly going to meet that afternoon. Several people from the market claimed to have seen her with that man around 2 in the afternoon. For investigators, that clue could be key to understanding what had happened. If Virginia had left the market with that man, then he was probably the last person to see her before she disappeared. Therefore, investigators began to look for any element that would confirm that version. Sucre is not a very large city, and in different points, there are security cameras installed in homes, businesses, and streets. If the motorcycle had passed through any of those areas, it was possible that it had been recorded. For that reason, the police began to request access to video surveillance systems in different places near the market and on possible exit routes. The goal was to reconstruct the route of Virginia and the man accompanying her to know exactly where they had gone. The images obtained by investigators began to clarify what had happened that afternoon. In the house where the man rented a room, there were security cameras that recorded who entered and left the property. When investigators reviewed the recordings of Thursday, December 18th, they found something that would completely change the course of the case. At 1:57 p.m., a camera captured Virginia entering the house. She was walking inside the place, and behind her appeared the young man who had taken her on the motorcycle. But the man who appeared in the recordings was not a stranger. It was Jorge Solis Leandro, 27 years old, a nursing student and partner of Naira, Virginia's older sister. Both entered together into the room he rented inside the house. From that moment on, the cameras continued to record the man's movements during the following hours. Before we continue, let's take a quick break. If you are finding this video interesting, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. That helps us a lot to keep making more videos and telling these kinds of true stories. That said, now, let's continue with the story. At 7:30 p.m., the young man left the room carrying an apparently full backpack. He got on his motorcycle and left the house, but shortly after, around 7:55, He returned again, this time with the backpack empty. The recordings showed that he made this same movement several times during the night. He entered the house, left with loaded backpacks, and returned without them. Finally, at 9:10, he went out for the last time carrying a larger, longer backpack. While all this was happening, Virginia never appeared on the cameras leaving the house again. With those images in their possession, investigators summoned the man for questioning. His answers began to show contradictions, which led the prosecution to request a search warrant to search the room where Virginia had last been seen entering. When police entered the place, what they found inside confirmed that this was not simply a disappearance. In the room, there was an electric saw and also several knives of different sizes. Among the objects found was Virginia's cell phone, the same one her sister had been calling repeatedly on the night of her disappearance. There were also items of clothing that the young woman had worn that Thursday when she went out to work. Forensic experts carefully reviewed every corner of the room. During the analysis, they found traces of blood in different parts of the place, and there were also bloodstains on the shoes of the man who rented the room. Subsequently, analyses would confirm that this blood belonged to Virginia. But the most disturbing discovery occurred in an adjoining room inside the same house. There, body parts were found that had not appeared in the place where the first remains were found. Among the recovered remains were the young woman's pelvis and thighs. A container was also found with human tissues that had been covered with salt, apparently with the intention of preserving them. While investigators continued to search the room and analyze every object found there, an element appeared that was particularly disturbing. Among the suspect's belongings was a handwritten note on 2 sheets of paper. That document described a series of schedules and concrete actions that suggested these were not confused notes or random phrases, but a kind of structured plan. On the sheet, for example, a time range was indicated in which the victim would be alive, and another moment in which certain acts would occur. One of the points indicated that between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m., the victim would remain alive. Then, in the next time interval, there was a reference to having intimate relations. This led investigators to suspect that the initial intention might have been to abuse Virginia. During the autopsy, it was not possible to confirm whether that abuse occurred or not. The state in which certain parts of the body were found made it impossible to establish with certainty. However, the existence of that document reinforced the idea that what happened had not been impulsive. The note also included instructions related to how to cut the body after death. The language used indicated basic knowledge of anatomy. For investigators, that was a clear sign of planning. It did not speak of a fight that got out of control or an unexpected attack, but everything pointed to the crime having been thought out in advance, and each step having been considered before being executed. With all the evidence gathered, the case moved quickly through the judicial system. The camera recordings, the blood traces, the objects found in the room, and the handwritten note formed a body of evidence that was difficult to refute. On December 21, 2025, just 3 days after the discovery of the remains, the accused and his defense made a decision. They opted for an abbreviated procedure and admitted their responsibility in the events. The amount of evidence presented by the prosecution made it practically impossible to maintain a different defense. During the hearing, the prosecution presented the reconstruction of the crime based on forensic reports and evidence collected during the investigation. According to that reconstruction, Virginia was taken to the room under some pretext. Once there, the attacker physically assaulted her until she was unconscious. Subsequently, he squeezed her neck until causing the asphyxiation that caused her death, and after that, he used tools he had in his room to dismember the body. The remains were placed in bags and transported by motorcycle during the night. The intention was to abandon them in different points to prevent them from being found, and thus make it believe that Virginia had simply disappeared. However, the plan did not turn out as expected. The bags broke, and the remains were discovered, allowing the investigation to begin quickly. That same December 21st, the Bolivian justice system handed down a sentence, and Jorge Solis Leandro was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the right to pardon, the maximum penalty contemplated in Bolivia for the crime of femicide. The decision closed the judicial process quickly, but the impact of the crime was deeply felt by Virginia's family and the entire city of Sucre. A young woman who had barely finished school and was about to start a new stage of her life had been the victim of extreme violence within her own trusted circle. The sentence put an end to the judicial process, but for the young woman's family, nothing could really close the wound left by her death. Her mother lost a daughter who had worked from a very young age to help at home, a young woman who had managed to finish school with honors and was about to start a new stage at the university. For her sister Naira, the blow was doubly devastating. The man with whom she had a romantic relationship and who had been part of the family's daily life for years turned out to be responsible for the crime of her own sister. The trust they had placed in him ended up becoming one of the most painful elements of the entire tragedy. Virginia's story left a deep mark on those who knew about the case, not only because of the brutality of the crime, but because of the life that was cut short. She was a hardworking young woman, outstanding in her studies and with clear plans for her future, a life that was just beginning and ended in the cruelest way. Although justice handed down the maximum penalty allowed by Bolivian law, the absence Virginia left in her family and environment is something that no sentence can repair. Her story remained as a painful reminder of how fragile trust can be and how violence can hide even in the closest circles. And well, dear audience, that's it for another investigation. What do you think of today's case? We would really like to read your comments, as your opinion on the cases is very important to us. Remember to always do so with the utmost respect possible, both for the victim and for the other viewers and us who will be reading them. Before you go, leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, don't forget to share this video if you think someone you know might be interested. See you in another criminal investigation. Goodbye.